Who is Madelyne Pryor? Some people think she's Jean Grey. Others think she's the Black Queen. But one thing I can tell you is that she has one of the most messed up stories of all the Marvel characters. We'll discuss the Goblin Queen Madelyne Pryor today. Thanks for joining me. I'm ElecTrish, and this is Cosplay My Way. In order to understand the character of Madelyne Pryor, we do need to look at Jean Grey, the entity who becomes one with the Phoenix, and later, the Dark Phoenix. All of us know how powerful and cosmic the Dark Phoenix entity is, and Jean Grey eventually has to sacrifice herself to save all of mankind from herself. I mean, she blew up an alien planet of millions. Maybe even billions. So who's hurt after all this death and destruction the most? Jean Grey's lover, Scott Summers, known as Cyclops, as seen in this issue of Uncanny X-Men 168, the first appearance of Madelyne Pryor. In this issue, we see Scott vacationing in Florida, visiting an old fling of his. He's doing well. He's even going on a trip now to Anchorage, Alaska with his father. But when he goes to get on the plane, he sees a very familiar face and red hair and pale skin. Is it Jean Grey? No. It's the first appearance of Madelyne Pryor. After spending time in the plane and in Alaska together, Scott Summers and Madelyne Pryor begin to form a relationship. In issue 170 of the Uncanny X-Men, he can't deny his attraction to her, nor can she to him. During a romantic evening of dancing the night away, Scott sees Madelyne appear before a fire, and he then sees her as Jean Grey, or the Phoenix, and he starts to become very uncomfortable. So what does he do? He tells her about Jean Grey, shows her her photo, and Madelyne is shook. She's like, "This is me." So Madelyne is now wondering, she's plagued by the idea that Scott Summers may be interested in her only because she resembles his ex-lover identically. During their very real and deep conversation that follows, Scott says, "Madelyne, I like you a lot." And then she says, "Because of who I am or who I look like?" And he says, "I don't know. I'd like to find out." So in issue 175 of the Uncanny X-Men, Scott is fully committed to his relationship with Madelyne Pryor, and he even goes to visit Jean Grey's grave to make peace with the fact that he's ready to move on, but he wants her to know. He hopes she understands. So Scott Summers and Madelyne Pryor get married. Now let's fast forward to issue 201 of Uncanny X-Men. In this issue, Madelyne Pryor and Scott Summers make a baby. And that baby, in case you didn't know, is Cable. But it's not the perfect happy family at all. Madelyne is very upset because Scott has been away. In fact, he was away when Cable was born. He wasn't even there for the birth of his child or there for his wife, who was a new mother. Instead, he's trying desperately to be the leader of the X-Men, but now it's between him and Storm. So Scott challenges Storm to a duel in the Danger Room to see who will become the leader of the X-Men. And guess what? Storm wins. So now that Scott will not be the leader of the X-Men, he can go home and finally patch things up with Madelyne and work on that. But then something wild happens in this issue that changes all of that. In the Avengers issue 263, it's the beginning of X Factor, and they find a capsule in the water, and it contains Jean Grey, who's alive. So things are really rough at home between Madelyne and Scott. He's not helping her with the baby, he's not listening to her needs, he's basically a horrible husband to her. And she's very upset because she's trying to live with the fact that she resembles his ex-lover. All of this is seen in X Factor number 1. So Scott apologizes to Madelyne and says that he's going to be the husband that she needs. And then out of nowhere, a phone call comes in, and it's Archangel. He's telling Scott that Jean Grey is alive. And Scott is shocked to hear the news, but Jean Grey wants to see him. So Scott decides not to tell Madelyn that Jean Grey is alive, and he leaves her and her son again. But the real question is, how the heck is Jean Grey alive? So basically, the Phoenix was a separate entity that had perfectly duplicated Jean's body and personality. Too perfectly, since Jean's heroism caused the entity's self-destruction. It was all a clone. So how is Madelyn doing after Scott leaves her again, Jean Grey is alive, and all of that? Well, not so great. Let's go to issue 223 of the Uncanny X-Men, and I'll tell you more about it. So let's talk about this moment in Madelyne Pryor's history. We're fast forwarding to a time that's pretty dark, where Mr. Sinister has controlled the Marauders, and they've taken her baby. So Cable is gone. So the Marauders have taken her child, and they have actually tried to assassinate her. They even shoot her, and she wakes up in the hospital. When she wakes up in the hospital, things get even worse when she discovers that she has no records of herself ever existing, of her child existing, of her life. So it's as if she's not even a person. So during this entire ordeal, Madelyn turns to the X-Men, who are taking care of her and making her feel at home when she's living with them. But just remember, Scott's not taking care of her. He's with a new team, the X Factor, who also has Jean Grey. So now let's fast forward again to Uncanny X-Men issue 232. In this issue, we finally see Madelyn start to gain some confidence back. She's starting to have her own life again. She's not thinking about Scott. In fact, she's interested in someone else, his brother, Havoc. So she turns on the TV, and while she's casually sitting there watching it, she discovers that Scott Summers is on the television, and he's with Jean Grey, and she loses it. She reacts so extremely that she actually punches the TV and then passes out afterwards. So now we're going to Uncanny X-Men issue 233. In this issue, we're seeing a dream sequence where Maddie's having this very elaborate, very psychological dream. So in Maddie's dream, she has wings and she's flying freely throughout the world, happy as can be. She's with the man that she loves, Scott Summers, and their child, and they're feeling so in love, and everything is wonderful. But then Madelyn sees a friend to the X-Men known as Gateway, and Scott shoots him with his laser. And then suddenly, out of that optic blast, you see a figure with no features, like a mannequin. But out of nowhere, Cyclops embraces the creature and starts to kiss it, feeling in love with this creature. That's not Madelyn. So now something really strange begins to happen. Scott takes away Maddie's wings, saying that she doesn't need them because she's not special like them. Then he takes Cable away from her, his own child, and gives it to the entity that he's with. And then he starts to take things away from Maddie, her hair, her eyes, her mouth, and he puts them onto the entity, and it becomes Jean Grey. So at the end of this issue, Scott has taken everything from Madelyn. She has no features. She has no identity. She is abandoned and alone. So now we'll come to the last issue we'll talk about today on Cosplay My Way. Issue 234 of the Uncanny X-Men. In this issue, Madelyn is still in her altered state of reality, and she comes to a fork in the road, where she has to make a decision. Does she go left or does she go right? She goes left. So while Madelyn is on her chosen path, she trips over some bones that appear to be an animal carcass and tumbles down a hill into water. She emerges from the water naked, and she feels hands on her shoulder, calling her by her name. It's a creature that's giving her a new cloak. So this demon entity leads her into his kingdom, and while in the kingdom, he's showing her something in his nails. In every one of his nails, she sees a version of her life. And then, all of a sudden, he stabs her. The demon stabbing her shows her that there are all versions of realities, and that this is only one of them, and that she is now bound to him. So then we see the first image of Maddie in her full new outfit as the Goblin Queen, which is the outfit that I'm going to show you how I made. So now I'm going to show you how I created the look of Madelyne Pryor. So first I'm mapping out on this top where I'm going to be cutting it. And then I'm going to take the scissors and cut right down the middle. You want to cut right down the middle because this kind of top, the style is, shall we say, exposed on both sides. Now I'm taking some liquid stitch and I'm just applying that. What you want to do after you apply it under the fold is just press it down. Then I put the top back on the mannequin and I can move on to the skirt. I'm mapping out the shape that I want it and then I'm going to cut into it on both sides. Now that it's back on the mannequin, I can move on to the chest. So this chest piece is part of a light that I no longer use. And then I just put some paper that's red underneath. And now I'm going in with the gold jewels, which I got on Amazon. So I just add all of these little gold circles all around the big circle. Now finally, the cape. Now I take a small pair of scissors and I go in until it's nice and shredded. And that's it. Thank you for watching another episode of Cosplay My Way and finding out more about the complicated history of Madelyne Pryor. I'm ElecTrish, and you can follow me for more.